Hello viewers, and welcome once again. We are still under logic, cried Almighty God's algebra. Today we are going to treat principle of intentionality. Principle of intentionality. It is an opposite of principle of intentionality. Let's start. Principle of intentionality. Definition. If P is equal to P or Q is intensification of P and P or Q is equal to P is extenuation of P or Q. Then P is equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P is tautology. We have defined principle of intentionality. You said that definition, if P is equal to P or Q, is intensification of P, and P or Q is equal to P, is extenuation of P or Q. Then P is equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P is tautology. We are going to prove this definition from P equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P tautology. For there, we then prove that it is P equal to P or Q is intensification of P, and P or Q equal to P is extension of P or Q. So I'm going to prove it. Prove. Now we know that if P equal to P or Q is the extension of P, and P or Q equal to P is the extension of P or Q, then P is equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P is tautology. You know that this P equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P is tautology is our logical consequence. Is our logical consequence. Because we assume that statement this division is true. That is tautology. It is true that this division is true. If it is true, then we then deduce that the consequence is this consequence is logical consequence of P equal to P or Q is the expression of P, and P or Q equal to P is the expression of P or Q. Then it says, suppose P equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P. Is tautology is logical consequence of logical consequence of P equal to P or Q is intensification of P and P or Q equal to P is extenuation of P or Q. Now, we assume that the logical consequence P equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P tautology is logical consequence is true, that it is logical consequence of P equal to P or Q is the expression of P, and P or Q equal to P is the expression of P. So if that is the case, you say if and only if, since this is tautology, P equal to P or Q, if and only if P or Q is equal to P tautology, that means that whenever the left consequence is true, also the right consequence is also true. Whenever the right consequence, whenever is left equivalent is true, also the right equivalent is also true. In the same vein, whenever the right equivalent is false, also left equivalent is also false. You say that it is logical equivalent. So whenever I evaluate it, it will give us tautology. That is always true. There's no possibility of getting falsity if you evaluate the statement. Now, since it is tautology, this vibration statement is tautology. You can also transform it to Ocean statement and it will still preserve tautology. That is, if and only if P is equal to P or Q implies P or Q equal to P. We have now transformed it to conditional statement. And if you validate statement, it means that whenever the antecedent is true, also consequence is also true. So in valid statement, not possible negative positive always true. We say that it is tautology. Is tautology. Being justified by logical implication. Being justified by logical implication. We have done logical implication in our previous tutorial. We can go back to our previous tutorial to be acquainted with knowledge of logical implication. So it's through logical implication that we transform this P equal to P or Q implies P or Q equal to P. Tautology is tautology. From this by conditional statement, if and only if, since this statement is tautology, and P equal to P or Q is proper implication of P or Q equal to P. Is proper implication of P or Q equal to P. We then deduce that it is certain that P equal to P or Q exists. And if it's certain that P equal to P or Q exists, we then say that P equal to P or Q is logical implication of P or Q equal to P. If and only if P equal to P or Q is logical implication of P or Q equal to P. If and only if this is true, that means P equal to P or Q is logical implication of P or Q equal to P. Then this also must also be true. P implies P or Q is tautology. That means since this P equal to P or Q is logical implication of P or Q equal to P, we have found out that this P equal to P or Q, it is not logical equivalent. It's not law. It's not logical equivalent. It is logical implication. In the sense that P is a microcosm of P or Q, while P or Q is macrocosm of P. That means, in other way around, P is a subset of P or Q, while P or Q is superset of P. So if that is the case, so we say that it is logical implication. That means it is grace. Since it is logical implication, we say that P, you then transform it to conditional statement. We then say that P implies P or Q. And whenever evaluate the statement, because whenever P is true, also P or Q must also be true. So whenever evaluate the statement, it always be truth. That must be negative positive. We say that statement is tautology. Now, since this statement is tautology, we then also deduce that P exists because P is proper implication of P or Q. If P exists, we then say that P is logical implication of P or Q. But meanwhile, this P implies P or Q is tautology is being justified by logical implication. Is being justified by logical implication. It's through logical implication that we transform this P equal to P or Q to conditional statement. P implies P or Q and is to be tautology. By logical implication. If and only if P is logical implication of P or Q. Since P is an implication of P or Q, is true, also this also must also be true if and only if P is equal to P. That means since P is not a function of P or Q, then the logical function is equal to itself. That means it is logical equivalent. Because whenever the left hand side of P is true, also the right side of P is also true. In the same vein, whenever the right side of P is false, also the left side of P is also false. We say that it is logical equivalent. I mean, it is law. It is logical equivalent. That means it is law. Being justified by identity, the sameness. By identity. If and only if P is equal to P or bracket Q and not Q is still logical equivalent. Whenever any term is all with falsity is certain as that term. That means this Q and not Q is equal to falsity by law of complement is equal to falsity. So if P or with falsity is certain as P. So being justified by law of identity. By law of identity. You go to this side. If and only if P is equal to P or now let us transform Q and not Q, that is conditional statement, into conditional statement. I'm going to transform Q and not Q, that is this conditional statement, into conditional statement. We're going to have Q upon Q. That means Q implies Q. You see that the right hand side of the equation has now been intensified, that has been increased in value. It's not greater than the left hand side of the equation. You see that it is intensification of P. Is intensification of P. So this Q and not Q is being transformed to question statement through Christ Almighty God's grace. So it's being justified by Christ the Almighty God's grace. Let's continue here. If and only if P is equal to. Now we're going to distribute this implication Q to this P. That means you're going to have P upon Q or Q. We have not distributed this Q implication to P to be the implication of P. And it's still intensification. It's still greater in value because it is equivalent to tautology. And tautology is greater than the variable. So the value is still greater than the left hand side of the equation. You say that is intensification of P. Is intensification of P being justified by distribution of implication. Because this implication is what is linked to this P. So we say that it's being justified by distribution of implication. If and only if. Now we're going to transform, we're going to revise this. Let us revise this P upon not P upon Q to conjunctive statement. To conjunctive statement. We have P equal to, why is going to be, you want to revise it to conjunctive statement because it's being generated, this Q is being generated from conjunctive statement. Now this implication Q is being generated from the conjunctive statement. So whenever I want to transform, whenever I want to revise it, it's going to be in conjunctive statement. That's why we have bracket P and not Q or Q. Being justified and is still intensification, is still greater in value, is still greater in value to P. I mean the last of equation. We say is intensification of P is intensification of P being justified by Christ Almighty God's grace. You see, the second Almighty by Christ Almighty God's grace that we used to revise it to this consecutive statement. So being justified by Christ the Almighty God's grace. If and only if and only if P is equal to, you see that this P and Q, all in brackets or Q, is equal to P or Q by second edge case law. By second edge case law, P and not Q, all in brackets or Q, is equal to P or Q, and is still the solution of P. So is P or Q is intensification of P being justified by second edge case law. Second edge case law being justified by second edge case law. Now we have proved that P is equal to P or Q is intensification of P. That means we have now proved that P is equal to P or Q is intensification of P. We then conclude. We say thus P is equal to P or Q is intensification of P. Having proof that P is equal to P or Q is the solution of P, we are going to prove the converse. Conversely, P or Q is equal to P if and only if P equal to P or Q is tautology. Is tautology. Is logical consequence of P equal to P or Q is intensification. Intensification of P and P or Q equal to P is extenuation of P or Q. So we assume that this, suppose P or Q is equal to P if and only if P equal to P or Q is, so we assume that this statement is true. That means this P equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P is tautology, is logical consequence of P equal to P or Q is intersection of P, and P or Q equal to P is intersection of P or Q. So if that is true, go to this side. So if it is true, and you know that whenever the left equivalent is true, also right equivalent is true since tautology, and whenever the right equivalent is false, also is also false. So we can then transform it to conditional statement through logical implication, and it will still preserve tautology. That means if and only if P or Q implies P or Q is equal to P implies P or P equal to P or Q, P or Q. You find out that whenever this statement, this antecedent is true, also question must also be true. So whenever I play this statement, the other like this always true. You say that is tautology. Is tautology being justified by logical implication? Being justified by logical implication. And since this is tautology, this question statement is tautology, we then deduce that antecedent exists because it's tautology. In the sense that the antecedent is proper implication of the consequent. And if that is the case, we say that the antecedent is logical implication of the consequent. That means if and only if P or Q is equal to P is logical implication of P. So the implication of P. So if this is true, also this also must also be true. If and only if, since we are going to deduce that this is logical implication. This is logical implication. Yes, this is logical implication. It's logical implication of, yes, it's logical implication. P or Q equal to P is logical implication of P. Then this is true also, this also must also be true. That means P implies P or Q. In the sense that P is logical implication, P is logical implication of P or Q. That means P is subset of P or Q, while P or Q is subset of P. If that is the case, we say that P proves P or Q. That's why we deduce it to conditional statement that P implies P or Q. And see that whenever this statement, it will give us tautology. And we deduce it, we transform this statement to conditional statement by logical implication. We say that this P implies P or Q is tautology, being justified by logical implication. If and only if P, now you see that this P, since P implies P or Q tautology, we then deduce that P exists, in the sense that P is proper implication of P or Q. And that is the case, we say that P is logical implication of P or Q. P is logical implication of P or Q. Since P is logical implication of P or Q, you want to use P or Q to prove P. We then deduce that P or Q is logical consequence of P. Yes, is logical consequence. Now this P or Q is logical consequence of P. So if this is true, also this also must be true. If and only if P or Q is equal to P or Q. So it is true that the logical consequence is equal to itself. because it is logical equivalent. In the sense that whenever P or Q at the left side equation is true, also P or Q at the right side equation is also true. In the same vein, whenever P or Q at the right side equation is true, also P or Q at the left side equation is also true. You see that it's logical equivalent. So it is true that P or Q is equal to P or Q, being justified by identity. That means the sameness. By identity. Being justified by identity. If and only if P or Q is equal to P and not Q or Q. That means this P or Q is equal to bracket P and not Q or Q. That means by second Educator's law, this P or Q is equal to P and not P, all in brackets, or Q. So it's equivalent to P or Q, being justified by second Educator's law. Being justified by second Educator's law. You continue to this side. If and only if P or Q is equal to P upon Q, P upon Q, or Q. You see that it has not been intensified because this right hand side is equal to tautology. Tautology is greater than D, P or Q. So you say its intensification of P or Q is intensification of P or Q. So being justified by Christ Almighty God's grace, because this conditional statement is being transformed to a conditional statement. So we can do that through Christ Almighty God's grace. By Christ the Almighty God's grace. We continue. If and only if P or Q is equal to, now let us distribute this Q, the implication, to this Q. That is going to have P or Q upon Q, which is justified by distribution of implication. That means we have P or Q upon Q. Is still intensification of P or Q because it's still equal to tautology, which is greater than the P or Q. Is intensification of P or Q being justified by distribution of implication. If and only if P or Q is equal to, now let us transform this Q upon Q to conjugative statement. Reason is that this Q is being generated from conjugative statement. So whenever I want to revise it, it's going to be in conjugative statement. So you're going to have P or bracket Q and not Q. You see that it is now extended. It's now extenuated. Because now is equal to P. That means P or bracket not bracket Q and not Q is equal to P. Is extenuation of P or Q. Being justified by, because it's through Christ Almighty God's grace that He transformed this Q upon Q implies Q to this statement Q and not Q. So being justified by Christ the Almighty God's grace. If and only if P or Q is equal to, you see that this P or bracket not or bracket Q and not Q is equal to P by law of identity. Law of identity, this P or bracket not bracket Q and not Q is equal to P. And is the extension of P or Q. Is extenuation of P or Q being justified by law of identity. Law of identity. We have now proved that P or Q is equal to P is a solution of P or Q. That we have now proved P or Q is equal to P is a solution of P or Q. Now we have now proved that you said it then said thus P or Q is equal to P is extenuation of P or Q. Having proved P is equal to P or Q is the extension of P exists, and P or Q equal to P is the extension of P or Q exists. We then conclude. So therefore, 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 If P is equal to P or Q, is intensification of P and P or Q is equal to P is extenuation of P or Q. Then P is equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P is tautology. Since we have now proved that P equal to P or Q institution of P exists and P or Q equal to P is extension of P or Q exists, then we then say that P is equal to then P is equal to P or Q if and only if P or Q is equal to P. Histology is principle of intentionality. So principle of intentionality exists. Thank you, viewers.